The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was fought during the Angolan Civil War, which South Africa was involved in. Allied to UNITA. To discuss more on this, we're joined by the Institute of Security Studies, Jakkie Cilliers. A very good evening to you, Jakkie, and thank you so much for speaking to us. As mentioned there were Namibians, Angolans, the Cubans who were very much a part of this battle. It was seen as some as a symbol of unity and resistance. So just looking back, the role of the SADF, which was aligned with UNITA, which was involved in the civil war with the MPLA or FAPLA, why did we get involved, and where we look at where it led us to the rise of democracy?
Good evening. Well, Cuito Cuanavale has achieved something of a mythical status. The battle itself was relatively inconclusive, but what was important that in the aftermath of Cuito Cuanavale, because the FAPLA troops had been forced back to Quito, and basically what happened is that the SADF and their UNITA allies weren't prepared to take the casualties to take Quito, and it remains unsure to this day if they really wanted to take Quito. But in the aftermath of Quito, there was a huge divergence in strategy between the Cubans and the Soviets. The Cubans basically took over the running of the FAPLA military campaign and then outflanked the SADF, which had lost air superiority because they had antiquated equipment. And that strategy after Quito changed the military balance in southern Angola completely, and that set the scene then for eventually what transpired in terms of the negotiations and the independence of Namibia. So Quito itself is perhaps not that important, but the Cuban intervention and what Cuba did after Quito certainly changed the entire military balance in southern Angola and eventually led to the independence of Namibia.
It's interesting that you should say that, because there are those who say that the apartheid regime tried to present their retreat as a tactical retreat and not as a defeat. Fidel Castro spoke about it once and said that in Cuito Cuanavale, the Cuban revolution played its own existence. But he did talk about the role of all those who are part of this, saying that it was a fighting the strongest enemy with the strongest might that they have. So it goes back to that symbolism of unity and resistance, as I said. So, I mean, how do we really view it? Do we really say that it is inconclusive, or it did conclude something else that would not have been anticipated?
Quito is symbolically important. There's no doubt about that. And the Cuban intervention played a huge role in the settlement of Namibia and the transition that eventually started in South Africa. Now, we can speak at length about what happened in Quito. There were a number of phases and so on and so forth. But Quito was certainly not a victory either for the Cubans, the FAPLA, or the SADF. At that point, the SADF and the UNITA allies had forced Cubans and the FAPLA, the Angolan military, back to Quito, but they didn't, or they couldn't take Quito. But it's what happened after Quito that was much, much more important. So Quito is important from a symbolic point. It is seen as a turning point in the war, and it was, because after that, the Cubans intervened massively, and they advanced on Rakana to the west of Cuito Cuanavale and changed the military balance in southern Africa entirely. And that led to the negotiated settlement in Angola. So Quito is symbolically important, but, the facts, everybody claims a victory in Quito.
Okay. It's a pity we can't talk about how they landed there because we don't have much time, but the battle itself led to the trilateral negotiations mediated by the US, which secured the withdrawal of Cuban and South African troops from Angola by 1991. Natim Tetra, our minister, says this helped to ring in freedom. How did it help us usher in, transformation in this country?
Well, it led to the implementation of Resolution 435, the UN resolution on Namibia, which there was, as you referred to it, there was a negotiated process that Chester Crocker from the US facilitated, and it led to the phased withdrawal of Cuba from Angola over, I think, about 2 years, 2.5 years, and the withdrawal of the SADF from Angola, and eventually the independence of Namibia. So from that perspective, symbolically, Cuban intervention, and not only symbolically, practically, Cuban intervention in Angola was hugely significant. No doubt about that. And South Africa continues to reflect on that and to honor Cuba for the role that it played in and defending Angola from the SADF.
And against the backdrop or the context of the Rooi Gevaar, the fact that it was the biggest battle on the African continent since World War II, was it also indicative of the importance of the role played by internationalists from different countries at the time, different regions at the time?
Well, you know, this was a proxy war between the East and the West. So South Africa, supported covertly by the United States, was on the one side, and it was fighting the Soviets and the Cubans and the MPLA in Angola. And of course, Cuba was not only involved in Angola, it was also very heavily involved in Ethiopia, Eritrea, in Somalia, as well as in the Congo. So Cuba played a big role in Africa, and that symbolism of solidarity, I think, was hugely important and is valued to today. Absolutely no doubt about the importance of the Cuban intervention.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if we just reflect on the fact that South Africa shared a border with Angola because it had occupied the SWA and was also determined to stop FAPLA making inroads into Mavinga. Just looking back at the relations where they are now, how were they influenced by, those dynamics?
Well, South Africa continues to pay for its debt of Cuba. South Africa to this day supports Cuba extensively. There are many, particularly in the governing ANC, who have a very soft spot for Cuba, and that recall the adventures of the ANC and Umkhonto we Sizwe in Angola. But the relationships the relationships between South Africa and Angola have often been quite tricky for a variety of historical comparative reasons. And those relations have never really been cemented. Angola traditionally tends to look more towards Central Africa than it does towards Southern Africa, even when it was the chair of SADC. Despite its enormous potential, Angola has not really turned out to be the powerhouse that it potentially can be, partly because large portions of Angola, the southern part, continues to suffer from the impact of that devastating war till today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for speaking to us and sharing your insights. Jakkie Cilliers from the Institute of Security Studies.